And even birth trauma can be an experience of, I may not survive this. This is an inescapable life threat and generates a sensation and an experience in the nervous system of terror. One of the things that we want to look at in this connection between early childhood and neurodevelopment and how it progresses to disease is some of the early effects of what would be considered an experience of terror for an infant. And it's different than just an experience of stress. This is an experience where it feels at the level of, I may not survive this, which at that time in our life would have generated a sensation of terror, a life terror. This is a life threat. I may not survive. From a medical standpoint, we just wait and give medications, or we do an emergency C-section, not realizing that the impact on the infant has been one of terror. In medical terminology, we call that fetal distress. That's not really accurate. That is fetal terror. I may not survive this. And when we look at why would that be the experience, it really comes down to the nervous system, and its role in our life is to keep us alive. And so if it feels like there is a life threat, it is going to have that response of terror. Its strategies are limited at that time. And that's what can create so many downstream problems, because it has to rely on strategies that then become habituated. They become the default way that we respond to everything because it happened during an early period of neurodevelopment. This is different than if we go through our neurodevelopment and then we have an experience of terror. It's not getting wired into our nervous system as this is how we respond to everything in life, which is what our body and nervous system is doing during neurodevelopment. It's gathering information so that it can help us survive all of life. And so it assumes that if we have an experience of terror, life must be full of terror. There's a specific term that we can use to describe what happens to the autonomic nervous system: global high intensity activation. There is this constant sense of impending terror. So that even if it's not real, there's a sense that, but it could just be right around the corner. There's this activation that's chronic. There's never a relaxation of that activation. And so it's global, meaning it's our whole nervous system and it's a chronic baseline. How does this impact and relate to the gut? Let me introduce you to IBS, Irritable Bowel Syndrome. This is a common GI disorder with an estimated prevalence of 5 to 20%, depending on which research you're looking at. And according to studies, it accounts for up to 3% of all general practice visits and up to 40% of all GI referrals. 40% of all people being referred to a GI physician are ultimately going to get a diagnosis of IBS. This is considerable morbidity, meaning the burden on society for IBS, that it represents that many physician visits. And the symptoms of IBS are general ones that include abdominal pain, bloating, and maybe some alteration in gut motility. And even that's where it starts to get even more vague. It can be constipation, it can be diarrhea, it can be both, but the main features are pain and bloating. This is not a life-threatening condition, which leads to some of the frustration for those who ultimately get diagnosed with IBS, because they're given this message of, well, we don't know what's causing it and we don't know what to do because there's not really anything wrong with you. And that's where some people have often gotten the message from their practitioners of, I think it's all in your head. I want you to do stress management. And then that leads to even more what I would consider medical trauma, where now I don't even feel safe in this relationship with my practitioner because they think I'm making this up. The direct correlation between childhood terror, early life terror, and IBS, because it's going to give us our solution out of it. For a nervous system coming out of childhood, primed to have a life of terror and having its activation always on, activation is what will generate the sympathetic response. The sympathetic response is what's communicated down our spine. We have a sympathetic nerve chain that goes down both sides of our spine, and that's what generates a stress response. That is what generates the adrenaline and what would be considered noradrenaline or norepinephrine. What is significant about that is that when that system is on, its end fibers for those nerves coming out of our spine go into the gut, and it's constantly releasing those hormones that put a stop to everything. So the sympathetic regulation of our gut is to take blood away from our gut to our muscles so that we can run from that tiger, and to shut things down in our digestive system. We're supposed to be running from a tiger. We're not supposed to be eating and digesting food. That is what will contribute to the constipation of IBS. However, we have this response in the body to freeze and shut down. And what happens with our nervous system when it's primed from childhood for this global high intensity activation, our nervous system is constantly already up here in sympathetic state. We're not down in parasympathetic. Then if it gets overwhelmed, it goes down into that dorsal vagal freeze. And we're there for as long as our body needs to be there. And then it comes out of that dorsal vagal freeze back into the sympathetic state because it's wondering, is the threat still here? When we have global high intensity activation, our nervous system, neuroception, is telling us, yes, the threat is still here. It didn't go anywhere. The threat is still here. And so once again, the system goes back down into the dorsal vagal freeze. So that IBS is not the result of a chronic stress response, nor is it the result of a chronic freeze response. IBS is one of the classic diagnoses of the up and down cycling between both sympathetic stress and overwhelm and terror. The features that are present with IBS reflect what's happening in the autonomic nervous system. It's an exact mirror of each other, which again gives us our path out. This is what's happening in both the nervous system and IBS. There is this baseline activation. And so with that, there's going to be that baseline activation in our gut as well. We never feel like it's completely gone. We may have a good day, but a good day means, my pain level was 2. It doesn't mean that I had no pain. There's always something, and people just learn to manage. But then there's these other elements. And the other element is hypersensitivity. And this is hypersensitivity in the autonomic nervous system. And so this would be where we see people are hypersensitive to everything. They're emotionally sensitive people. They are light sensitive, perhaps. They are sound sensitive, perhaps. They are sensitive people because that's their nervous system. That's what this global high intensity activation creates in their system. That leads to the next element, which is hyperreactive. So that if I'm hypersensitive, I'm going to not only be reacting, I'm going to be hyperreacting. And by that, I mean either hyperreacting with stress response, meaning I'm responding with more energy and activation than what is appropriate, or I've gone into the freeze. And so what would appear to others is I'm underreacting. These are the elements of the global high intensity activation and IBS. Even just being able to decrease the sensitivity and the reactivity a little bit, not 100%, but a little bit, is where we make the most difference with the symptoms and the degree of impact that it has on a person's life. So how do we do that? What we do is we look at what are those elements that contribute to regulation of the system. That's what we're needing to accomplish, regulation of the system. And that reminds me, when we talk about regulation, aren't we just talking about attachment and early childhood? Because our definition of attachment is that it is the degree of regulation that we have in our system coming out of our childhood. So that means that a person with IBS can have the best parents in the world, but simply because of how their nervous system is wired, that is dysregulated, they will have an insecure attachment style. They're wired for perceiving terror. That is an insecure attachment. That is not a secure attachment. And so when we talk about regulation, we're still really talking about also attachment. There's 3 elements that go into regulating reactivity. We get to start with somatic work in the body. We get to work with parts and one's thoughts and their belief system, because that will contribute to reactivity. And then we've got some biology work to do that will be part of regulating the reactivity of our nervous system, and especially in our gut. We know this from the studies showing the effect of serotonin on the gut and IBS. For some people, 5-HTP that will increase activity of serotonin makes it better. For others, 5-HTP that increases serotonin will make it worse, because it's not just a singular, well, everyone with IBS has decreased serotonin, or everyone with IBS has increased serotonin. It's everyone with IBS has dysregulated serotonin levels. For some, it's too much. For others, it's not enough. But for no one is it right in the middle where it should be. And so we really get to personalize our approach for each person, knowing that we will not know ahead of time exactly, are they the ones that will respond better to 5-HTP or tryptophan or none of those? But I guarantee you that there are somatic exercises that will help regulate everyone.